Good evening, everybody, and a special good evening to Dr. Sara Vakhshouri, who is an alumni of JNU and also Jamia Millia Islamia. And of course, she has 2 decades of uh, rich knowledge about energy industry. She is presently with SVB Energy and doing a great job in this field and has been very prominent speaker at world forums. Ma'am, welcome. And it's such a proud moment for all of us at FGS to host you and to uh, see you on this platform. It is a great honor indeed. And now, before we start, I would like to introduce, like Dr. Sandeep had introduced everybody. Zen from Brazil is with us. Dr. Amna is there. Of course, Gustavo Lima is also on this forum. Ma'am, we are looking forward to your insightful thoughts, and we are talking about energy, environment, security, geopolitics, and the floor is all yours, ma'am, to for the next number of minutes that you want to engage us with. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And also, Dr. Sandeep, thank you for the kind invitation. It's an honor for me to be here today. India is very dear to my heart. It's always a great feeling for me to even virtually be in India. I hope that I get a chance to be there personally at some point soon. So there are so many topics to unwrap when it comes to energy security, especially at this time that now we are dealing with multiple issues that are involves our daily life, but also global economy, global food crisis, food security. So particularly since the Russia war, right after the time that the world was just recovering from 2 years of pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, we could easily say that the whole world is currently in the middle of an energy crisis. And the issue is not just the high energy prices, but how these high energy prices has impact on different branches of economy, on global economy growth, and as I said, on the food security and also water and access, water, food, and also electricity access, energy poverty, and most importantly, energy transition that the whole world is now very much engaged into moving toward a net zero world. So if I just want to give a bit of background, starting from COVID-19, what really happened and how everything still has impact in our life from that time, is that obviously when the pandemic hit the whole world and all those stay-home orders and isolations and quarantine happen at a global scale, obviously the demand for oil, particularly, and energy shrank significantly, because most of the demand, especially from oil demand, is used in transportation. And obviously, as everybody remembers, we were all at home, not driving, and specifically not flying. So the market faced a demand shock. Suddenly, demand shrank significantly. Inventories were filled with oil and liquid. There was no customer. And at some point here in US, we had a negative almost $40 oil for WTI, which was unprecedented. So basically someone had to, the producers were paying $41 to customers to come and take those oil from them. We had a negative price. Why? Because there's a difference between the US oil stock market and European one. In the US, when you are trading WTI, when a contract expires, you have to physically lift that contract. And at that point, the inventories were all full and there was no demand for that. So again, just a very briefing on what happened. We had a huge oversupply in the market, and then we had the producers cut back their production accordingly. We had two different types of oil production decrease. One, which we call it voluntarily oil production cutback, which was done by OPEC Plus members. The OPEC Plus agreed in the month of May to cut back its production to balance the market, and then they offered a production increase after the pandemic was somehow start to wind back, and because of the vaccination, the demand started to grow. We also had an organic oil production drop by countries like United States or European countries, Canada. Why we call it organic? Because the oil prices were below the production cost. So because the producers did not make any profit, naturally their production dropped. So the market started finding its balance, and then after the vaccination, a global vaccination of COVID, the demand started growing in a healthy way. The OPEC Plus started their program for increasing their production, which is going to end this September of this year, but they already are going to increase their production of the September in the month of June and July and August. But some of that oil never came back, especially the oil that was produced in the United States, because of lack of investment. So even before the Russia war, because nowadays everybody is blaming the high oil prices and energy crisis on the Russia-Ukraine war. But even before the war breaks, in the last quarter of 2021, we start seeing the rapid increase of energy prices, natural gas, LNG prices, and oil prices. Well, which obviously lead to higher prices of fuel, gasoline prices, diesel prices, jet fuel, and also higher LNG prices, higher electricity prices. Before even the war breaks in Europe, because of very high natural gas prices, which even before the war was 10 times more than the prices in US, the difference, many of fertilizer factories started to reduce their production. So by December of 2021, we could see that somehow a food crisis might come up if the natural gas prices are high. Why? Because the fertilizer that is used in agriculture, and then those vegetables we are eating, and also the feedstock for cows, or also the meat that is consumed, we're going to have crisis of enough fertilizer. Then in early 2022, we had the war between Russia and Ukraine break, which exacerbated everything. Russia is a major producer and exporter of oil, natural gas, and also liquid petroleum products. Ukraine, a major exporter of food, especially oil and wheat. So far, until the day that we are discussing this topic together, the world could not put a global embargo on Russian energy export, because it's impossible at this point to find a complete substitute for Russian energy supplies. However, some of the countries, including United States and Europe, they put voluntary self-sanction on importing Russian energy. But this was not easy. I'm sitting in the United States, gasoline prices are historically high, inflation is historically high, we have high food prices. Why? Because especially in East Coast of US, where I live, about 30% of unfinished gasoline and gasoline supply was coming from Russia. So as we see, the problem in the world is not even just crude oil, which because of lack of investment that happened during the pandemic, because of very low oil prices, and also lack of investment that was encouraged by political leaders like President Biden to encourage investors to divest from fossil fuel and invest in renewable energy, that huge lack of investment creates that supply strength that we have, so that now we're dealing with a shortage of supply. But what happens is that the supply shortage is even more critical than just a shortage of crude oil. We have a shortage of refinery capacity. In the United States, in the past 2-3 years, quietly, when everybody was busy with COVID, we had significant amount of refineries shutting down because of ESG purposes, because companies are so worried about polluting environment, about producing carbon and penalties. And obviously we had a new president in the White House that was discouraging investors and showing the prospect of, sorry, we don't want any more oil, we don't want any more refined petroleum products, electric vehicles by 2030. It's 2022 now. So 8 years. So most of these refineries started decommissioning. So at least in the United States, now the president of the United States realized that putting pressure on OPEC to produce more crude oil will not solve the issues in the United States because we have refinery capacity issues. Now they started talking to refineries, but when a president or energy minister comes to investor and tell them that produce as much as oil you can, produce as much as gasoline you can, this is your patriotic right to do that, but in 3 years we don't want your oil and gasoline anymore because we want to move to EVs, they don't invest, because you know that investment is long term, is a decade. No investor invests for 3 years, no investor invests for 5 years, investors invest for 10 to 15 years. So this is the trend in terms of investment and its impact on supply at the current moment. We have European countries that they have their own target for reducing their dependency on Russian both oil and gas. US gas and LNG exporters obviously redirect a lot of export. The US share of exports to Europe increased. Something interesting that happened in terms of oil was change of flow of the oil export, which I know that you are all experts and you're going to think about the geopolitical implication of that. Historically, most of the OPEC and Persian Gulf oil produced in Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and by OPEC used to go to east of Suez Canal, to China, to India, to Asia. And Russian oil, because of proximity, was mostly going to Europe. Now this has been changed. Most of Russian oil is going to India and China. Most of Saudi and Iraqi oil is going to Europe. So we see that diversion. Now Russia is looking at China and potentially India as a market for its natural gas, and US natural gas that, because of the long distance, was not economic to be exported to Europe or also Asia. Now it's hugely, not only economic, but also hugely profitable for US LNG exporters to export their LNG to Europe. So we're obviously going to see some long-term changes. If I want to briefly, I like to put things in a timeline because things changes. If we look at the short period of time, short term, the Russian oil and gas has no substitute. We keep seeing India and China importing Russian oil. Why? Because it's discounted. You can't expect India to endanger its national security or energy security by not importing Russian discounted oil. You can't expect the same thing to happen to China. We are going to have lower economic growth in the next 2 years, as was indicated. We are going to have high energy and fuel prices. We are going to have shortage of food because of the issue of fertilizer and also because of high transportation prices. We have countries like India saying that they are not going to export, it's not going to export wheat because domestic supply is priority. And if we have rice exporters, corn exporters, they all start saying the same things. Sorry, world, we're not going to export rice because we have to feed our own people. We are going to have a very hard year next year in terms of food security and also in terms of energy. Obviously, region to region is going to be impacted differently. We're expecting that Europe, bearing bears the highest pain in terms of energy prices, electricity prices, fuel prices, gas prices, natural gas prices, especially this winter. If it's cold, it's going to be more painful for Europe. The energy crisis and energy prices is going to be different, obviously, regionally. In terms of food, food security, emerging markets, and unfortunately, people that they cannot afford premium prices for food are going to suffer more. So this gloomy story mostly is a short-term period. We are looking at 1 or 2 years until we have new energy supply coming to online. We are expecting US shale oil production to increase further in the next year or so. We are going to have new resources to come out. But again, we cannot think that in the next decade, you're going to have zero Russian oil exported, zero Russian gas exported, because simply there is not enough capacities to even bring it into the online by that time frame. There are going to be some changes that at this point of time, no one is sure. Are we going to move to net zero faster or slower? Obviously, now everybody, most of the leaders in the world have recognized that it's important to have a diverse basket of different resources for their energy security and national security. So what we expect is that looking on environmental issues and looking into energy transition, obviously natural gas is going to keep its share. The share of natural gas is going to increase. We think that nuclear is going to have bigger share than was expected. The nuclear power generation. Obviously, many people are looking into hydrogen, but what would be the source of that electricity? We think nuclear is going to have a big share. Solar and wind would grow, but we don't think that they're growing so rapidly or going to have a huge significant role. We are going to see in the next decade a huge share for CCS and CCSU, carbon capture and storage and utilization, obviously, because many countries would still produce coal, oil, and natural gas and use them, but they're going to use CCS technologies to make that cleaner. So this is pretty much a brief, I said it brief, I know I was talking for a long time, but I was trying to unwrap as much as topics that I can, and that's why I could briefly just touch on everything that I could. But yes, this is what we are seeing. And in terms of Russian share globally in the long term, obviously we think that the sanctions are going to stay in place for a longer time. So, but there's not going to be a significant embargo against Russia before the world is ready, which at this point we don't see any capacity to substitute Russian energy. But definitely there's not going to be enough investment and technology. Many companies already left Russia. So in a long term, we are expecting that if Russia is going to be only dependent on its own technology and investment for its energy industry, its energy production might hit and might have hurdles for further development. Thank you. I will.
Thank you, Dr. Sara. It was really illuminating hearing you and your insights on energy industry and how, what is the prognosis. It was really interesting. I do have a few inputs, which maybe in terms of question and answers, we can all interact. I have a few things, a few observations on this energy thing. Can I start? Can I start, please?
Yes, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, it didn't come suddenly. I see Saudi going away from Americans and warming up to China. That politics is also playing a big role in this energy sector. Number one, and secondly, geographies really play a big role in transportation of these energy products. Like, for example, natural gas, it can really flow very efficiently through the pipelines. And those pipelines take humongous amount of investment. And how can you suddenly, uh, dismantle Nord Stream 1 or 2 or whatever? And the countries which are all involved in creating that kind of ecosystem, are they willing to really just leave it aside? It is actually not very realistic as of now. Today they're talking about it, but maybe tomorrow it will be very different. They cannot dismantle these pipelines. And another issue was like, again, we talked about India consuming cheap oil from Russia or China taking these cheap oil. Actually, it is misnomer because India's needs are humongous. We still need to buy most of our products from Middle East because Russian oil coming from north of Russia is actually impractical. And also, whatever we have imported till now is only merely 3 to 5% of our energy need from Russia. It was more of a, sign of gesture that we are having our independent policy and India has its own right of way kind of a thing. And you talked about wheat exports, and it was very interesting to see how even in food, energy is, of course, quite played out by politics, but even in food, there were some European importers which were buying wheat from India. But when it landed, these all went after all the checks and balances and all the tests, and they were all passed. But eventually they landed in Turkey and it was rejected because it was Indian wheat. And that's how you see the politics playing out in this whole world forum. So what are your views on these number of observations?
I agree with you on most of them. In terms of how the world order, in terms of politics, is changing, I agree that the war has changed, or at least showed that where the world is going. And yes, we see that, for instance, most of the Arab GCC countries did not take any strong position against Russia. Obviously, they are working, and as I just quote recently, His Royal Highness the King of Jordan, that Russia-Ukraine war is so far from us, is not into our agenda to comment. As far as the Middle East and our Arab countries are concerned, is Russia's presence in Syria, which has been a good thing for us. So politically, they did not take any positions against that. And we see that for, at least as of now, having the current administration in the US has not historically have a good terms with Saudi Arabia, with the Crown Prince, of course, because of their political history that the party had with Saudi Arabia. Also, we did not see that Saudi Arabia or OPEC coming and jumping and saying, okay, we are going to increase our production to cover for Russian lack of supply. None of them support that. And the story of Russia is different from the story of Iran. Russia is not easily replaceable, Russian oil, like the way that the world replaced Iranian oil at the time that, like in the last couple of years. And we might see that, for instance, OPEC members, let's say Saudi Arabia, when United States put sanctions on Iran during President Obama and again during President Trump, we saw that OPEC could increase its production and cover for that Iranian oil that was sent out of the market. But OPEC never took any step or gave any indication, even from beginning, that they are willing to increase their production so the rest of the world can sanction Russia. But also that the only thing that which I agree, that's fact, that at that time His Excellency Barkindo, General Secretary of OPEC, said is that Russia exports 7 million barrels per day, and look at the numbers, we cannot substitute Russia, because they know this is a slippery slope. If they say, okay, we cover 100,000 barrels of Russian missing oil, now tomorrow is 1 million, 2 million. So they were very strong, strongly indicate that they are not going to support that. But also, obviously, the China, Russia, and also the other countries that are like Iran now has 25-year agreement with China to somehow, if you read that 25-year agreement that Iran signed with China, is basically China takes over every industry in Iran, from ports to mining, energy, and environment, everything, infrastructure. So if Iran is going to be isolated from the world and cannot get any investment, well, they're turning to China. The story in Africa is even scarier in these terms. I mean, when I say scary from Washington perspective and not from where you are sitting, from India or the rest of the world. But if you look at Africa, China is all over the world. And we are looking into energy transition, which requires a lot of strategic minerals that are either produced in China or in Latin America or Africa, in countries that are closer to China, or China somehow owns or manage or control those mines, or they are processed in China. They're sent the raw material to China, processed. So as we move toward energy transition, China is going to have, China is not a big exporter of oil or gas, but China is exporting more than 97% of solar panels in the world. And obviously, countries like India, Saudi Arabia, they don't have the same feeling that Washington has toward Russia. So I perfectly agree with you on number one, on the political issue. On change of flow of oil, I agree with you, it's not economic. So sending the Russian oil to India and then sending Iraqi oil to Europe, it doesn't have an economic sense, obviously. And they're the case for Japan too. For instance, Japanese are like banging their head or hands to the wall and telling the US administration that Russian oil, it's so close to us, you know, and it's part of our national security. We don't want to substitute that, or Russian gas. But it's obvious that because of the war, it's a big moral issue. But if things tamper off, there is a treaty, there is a ceasefire, everything would go back to normal. Everybody would want to go back to their import. European Union is a different issue. If Europe, which we think Europe would not want to go back in terms of import of oil and gas to pre-war. So if Europe doesn't go back, they need to still bring that oil from Saudi Arabia, from Iraq. And this means that if Russia cannot sell oil to Europe, then they have to continue selling discounted oil to India. And if you look at India's import from Russia, India's oil before from Russia was about 40 or 50,000 barrels per day. Today is between 500 to 700,000 barrels per day. It's more than 10 times. Why? Because they're offering huge discount. If they don't offer the discount, it doesn't make economic sense for India to import the Russian oil. But what if Europe doesn't want to import any more Russian oil and is paying more premium prices to import Saudi oil, Iraqi oil, OPEC, Gulf oil production, Iran, even though under sanctions, we know that Venezuela started sending oil to Europe. So then Russia has no market in Europe. They have no other choice to continue giving that discounted oil to India. And then if the prices are high, India might buy it. If the prices are low, they don't need to buy it. But as you said, India has a big demand and they're still importing from Gulf countries.
Yes, ma'am. And what is surprising is that China has brought two bitter enemies together. Now that with 25 years engagement with Iran, and Saudi is also engaging there for their energy, and they're getting investment from Chinese. So that's the reality today. And one more thing, that e-vehicles, there's a lot of talk about e-vehicles, that they're going to reduce the pollution levels. But again, it's a misnomer, because it only, 7 to 8% of pollution is caused by the vehicles. It's the industrial pollution which is creating the problem in the world. And one more thing, nuclear is very important, as you pointed out. Nuclear is the thing, because it's become much safer. It's the control and their even storage has become very efficient. So we should all go in for nuclear energy. That's the need of the day. But there are market players who do not want nuclear energy to flourish. What are your views on that?
Thank you for, I very much agree with you, your point of view on e-vehicles, but unfortunately, or I don't know, whenever there is a change in industry, there's a lot of money involved. When we are changing everybody's car from using gasoline to EV, there are companies that they make money. Those companies lobby, they send someone from auto industry to be an energy secretary. Or the president, So as you said, politics, these companies that they make so much money, they have their own lobbies, they choose their own politicians, their own ministers to move everybody, to encourage everybody to use EVs. But I mean, if you look at the experts, most of the energy experts in US laugh at this target of 2030 EV. In US is a big country. People in US drive long distances. Maybe EVs work in China, maybe EVs work in India, maybe EVs work in Europe, but you cannot drive from Maryland to California on EV, And something that politicians don't tell people is that you need to charge your car with electricity, and electricity is not air, it's coming from somewhere. So if you use nuclear or coal or gas, you're still polluting, creating pollution for making electricity. So maybe there's no carbon coming out of your exhaust. You still produce some sort of pollution for producing that electricity, and that is costly. So if you're in Europe and prices of gas are skyrocketing, if you have to put electricity in your car and charge it, it's not cheaper than putting gasoline in your car. This is the same story as clean cooking. If I want to come, for million years, people in India or like in China, they were making chapatis on the wood, like in India, people go in the morning and collect woods and they make their food, Now some companies would come to them and say, this is creating pollution. I have this gas stove, we call it clean cooking. Let's replace all the wood burning stove in India and put gas because it's clean. People cough less. And then, I want to be the president of India, or prime minister of India, I would panic to make all my rural cooking from the wood that is everywhere in a village, or dung, which it's available, to natural gas that is imported from somewhere. And if, for instance, India would already promoted that clean cooking, that everybody from tomorrow you cook on natural gas, today that we are in this with these gas prices, what would happen? People from villages would come to the city and it's like, we can't eat food, I know that I work on this project, and I know people in India, in rural area, they would say that chapati is more delicious on wood than if it's cooked on gas. That's one thing, and it's more natural. But the thing is that there's a lot of money, if I'm a gas burning small startup that sell this gas stove, the best market for me is India, and then I would argue that, what, this creates pollution. Why not everybody cook on gas?
Thank you, ma'am. And we'll take more questions. I should not hijack this conversation. There is Cássio and Dr. Sandeep, and Julio is also there, Gustavo and Dr. Amna. They can pose their questions, please.
Yeah, question from Professor Cássio.
Okay, so very interesting lecture. I really appreciated it. Brazil is also facing energy crisis, even though most of our oil production is used nationally. Our oil is used nationally, but there is the political, this is a very political year in Brazil. And therefore, we are looking at potential investigations on the oil companies here. How can governments balance the international oil price, protecting the companies, but at the same time protecting the basic needs of every individual? So I wouldn't ask a question, but I would just do this small provocation. How can governments balance international needs and at the same time national needs, but at the same time protecting the people's needs and the companies' needs, because the companies will they have costs, they have competition to see to who they will sell. We are living on an open market economy, so how can we reconcile all these different interests?
Thank you for your question. It's going to be very hard. So it's a very bumpy road for people and governments now. And we might see so many uprising and protests in many different countries because people are suffering from the economy of post-COVID, which many people lost their job or they earn less. And also, then we have companies, we have this global energy crisis, which is really no solution for that. We have huge global inflation that is driven by high food and fuel prices, and that there is not really any solution for that. Like in the United States, what is Federal Reserve doing? They're constantly increasing the interest rate to control the inflation. That's the natural, traditional way to control the inflation. You increase the interest rate so people will consume less, the demand will fall, the prices will fall, you control the, but what I think the Federal Reserve, the result of what Federal Reserve is doing is that next year we might have an economic recession in the United States because the inflation is not traditional because of traditional causes. Inflation in all the countries, in Europe, in the US, everywhere, is happening because food prices increasing, fuel prices are increasing. And people still have to eat and still have to drive, no matter if the interest rates are high. When the interest rates are high, you can't buy a home, you can't buy a car, you can't buy a luxury item. You stop using less money on your credit card, but you still need to eat, you still need to move, fuel. So inflation is going to be, and as you see, like in US, in Europe, almost close to 9 to 10%, historically high. And as indicated, the whole global economy is going to slow down. They're expecting a recession in US, expecting a recession in Europe, which is going to have a domino effect on the rest of the global economy. So the sad news is that for the next 1 or 2 years, there is not really any solutions. The government might come with different policies. And what I would say is the first immediate policy that most of the governments are doing to save the commodity prices inside is, as you said, to put a ban on export. Like for instance, India is like, I'm not going to export wheat because my own people have to eat first. US might soon come up with the idea of, I put a ban again on export of crude oil to say, okay, because then we want to bring the gasoline prices down. And when the countries start to put ban on export of their critical commodity, that the world need that, this is going to just, again, exacerbate the crisis around the world. But now we are seeing protests in Brussels. It's not just protests in some country that they might have long-time political issues. So unfortunately, the world now in the next few years is not in a good place. And we might see a lot of political issues, political uprising, leaders change, like as we see what happened in France. So we might see many of them. And unfortunately, I don't have any solution that I could offer for Brazil or any government, because it's like a multi-dimensional crisis. I'm sorry for all this sad trajectory.
That it's sad news, but it's real news. It's real perspective.
The last question from my side. Because energy, I look very close this issue the entire last 3 months. One question, Dr. Sara. Do you think this diversification policy from both sides, either from the EU or from the Russia, which has been started not only the recent standoff, however, it started before the Crimean crisis 2014, But we have seen the kind of weaponize this gas, oil and oil gas by the Russia. So EU were very, very reluctant on the reliability of supply of that. So that is not the new issue. My question to you, and that this is a very, very, sometimes it puzzles me always. Okay, last 3 months, both France and German leadership, they were highly, reluctant on the match of the tone, a tone up with the US as well as the Ukraine. The kind of US has been accelerating this issue, and Ukraine was blaming on the divided EU, especially France and Germany. So, do you think the economic consideration, economic predominance over the geopolitics?
Yes, I think it is, and that also goes back to what we discussed with Colin Singh. The issue is that the economic, energy, food, national security pain of putting Russian energy on the sanction is so high that at some point countries might just, they don't have enough tolerance to bear that pain. And as we said, yes, like Europe can continually bring oil from Saudi Arabia and see that India is buying oil $30 per barrel less, and Saudi is giving the European higher, or even US LNG, they are putting a sanction on Nord Stream. The cheap Russian gas doesn't go to Europe, but they have to pay 10 times more for US LNG. So at some point when there are right people coming, like, I don't know, when the party, we have a huge change of party in France. If we have the same thing in Brussels, when people are hungry, they start vote and things start change. The thing is that in terms of agriculture, Ukraine is very significant. In terms of energy, Russia is very significant. It's not that I'm happy to say this, but unfortunately, Russian energy sources are not substitutable even for the next decade. And it's not a button that we switch it and say, tomorrow we all go on EV, tomorrow we all go nuclear. No, it takes 10 years. Yes, France today announced we're going to build 14 new nuclear reactors. It takes 10 years for one nuclear reactor to be started. And where that processed uranium is coming from Russia. Russia processed the most yellow cake in the world has come from Russia. It doesn't come from US. Yes, France is strong in that, obviously, but look at most of the uranium mines in Namibia, in Africa, Saharan Africa. Namibia has huge sources of uranium. Most of the mines are controlled by China. So there is no escape from that. And actually, the world doesn't have, at this point, tolerance for sanctions. Most of the sanctions were self-sanctions. And we see that if today Russia threatens like, okay, I'm not going to send gas to Hungary, they're going to paralyze. So they cannot even self-sanction. But we in the US, we are bearing a huge cause. In November, there might be really a change of Congress. We might have Republican in US Congress because of this economic pain. And even if you look at other sanctions, Venezuela and Iran, their export increased. They started exporting cargoes to Europe. This means that either President Biden closed his eyes or allowed Europe to import Iranian oil, which means the sanctions can't work. You can't put Belarus fertilizer under the sanction. You can't put Iran and Russia, Venezuelan gas under sanction. You can't put Iranian fertilizer and gas under sanction. You can't sanction Russia. You can't sanction Nord Stream 2 because the world will collapse. So it's like how practical it is, and goes back to that first political impact that we were discussing. If US is not creative with its foreign policy, the foreign policy that has of like sanction this, sanction that, embargo, it might not work. So they have to be more creative in their foreign policy, because if there is a treaty, as you said, like, would all the even European countries want to lose the ruling party to another like extreme because people are hungry and protesting in their streets. And again, I think China and India, their imports from Russia kind of shows that it's not really practical. It's not possible to put these resources under sanctions because you can only put an embargo when you have an alternative. If I'm a US president, I go to Prime Minister Modi and say, please don't import Russian oil. Prime Minister Modi will ask me, okay, from where do I bring oil? Do I have an alternative to suggest or not? You know, if I tell Iraq don't import Iranian gas, they tell me from where I bring that gas. You know, so if I don't have an alternative, it's
exactly
I can also
true.
I can also see Dr. Simant joining us from Poland. Welcome, sir.
Dr. Simant, are you here? Dr. Simant from Warsaw University of Warsaw.
Okay, then I hand over to Dr. Sandeep for a vote of thanks for our speaker.
Thank you so much, our respected research director, Colonel M.K. Singh, for very insightful and exciting moderating this session. And lots of thanks, Dr. Sara, as I was expecting, and the same, it happened that Dr. Sara lecture will be very, very insightful for policymakers as well as for academicians, energy analysis, and industry. So the way you responded, the questions, especially the questions were very, very crucial for geopolitics, for geoeconomics, as well as, of course, energy, because the topic is energy and geopolitics. So it's very, as I told you that your response and your insights are very, very going to be insightful and excellent for all stakeholders related to energy and geopolitics. So thank you so much once again for accepting our humble invitation. And thank you so much, our research director, Professor Cássio, to be here for 1 year, for 1 hour. You always participate in our program from Brazil. So from Brazil, from Poland, and from India, from Washington, DC, it's truly global, and because the name of the think tank is Forum for Global Studies. So I look forward to have you, Dr. Sara, in more programs with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, ma'am.